The problem with going directly at the status game is there's no longevity to it, right?
Yeah.
Now I got to buy another shirt. Now I got to buy a hoodie, and I've got to buy the suitcase to match, right? It's a slippery slope where you become enslaved, an enslaved consumer chasing status.
So this has been replicated. People who have the highest level of wealth and status in society also report having the strongest desire for wealth and status. At first glance, it's a bit counterintuitive because you might think that people who are kind of at the bottom of the social ladder, they would have the strongest desire to rise up and have status. And the people who are kind of dispossessed, materially impoverished, sort of overlooked in society, those would be the people who really want wealth and status a lot because they lack it. It's actually not the case.
Give me a little bit of a background on, the Rob Henderson that we've got online, right? Like your background there. Then I want to go into sort of your work, but I think everyone would like to know, how you got into this.
I mean, so I'm a psychologist by training, social evolutionary psychology. I received a Ph.D. in psychology from the University of Cambridge, which is why I was over in England and I'm still based there on a visa for now. Did an undergrad in psych at Yale, but before I spent a lot of this time in these universities, my life was a lot different. So I'm actually originally from California. Another reason why I'm out here. I was born in LA. Never really knew my parents. I have some flashbulb memories of my mother, never met my father, and I grew up in foster homes all over LA. Was later adopted and moved to a town called Red Bluff, my adoptive family and I, Red Bluff, California, which is this kind of, impoverished, rundown town in Northern California. But there was divorce, there were separations, and just a lot of instability and chaos after the adoption. I lived with my mom, raised by a single mom for a while in a duplex, and there was just a lot of sort of drama and turmoil. So I fled as soon as I could, and I enlisted in the military. I joined the Air Force when I was 17, right out of high school, barely graduated high school. And yeah, sort of from there, traveled the world and saw, and met a lot of people that I wouldn't have met where I was growing up in California. A lot of different experiences, and then from there, I sort of got my life on track, and took night classes, took the SAT finally, and that's how I ended up at Yale on the GI Bill, and then off to Cambridge. So, that's the sort of potted history of what my life has been like up until now, and. So these personal experiences have sort of informed my interest in class, in status, sort of the psychology of how we evaluate other people based on, the regard that we hold them in, issues involving sort of reputational concerns, the image that we present to others. And so personal experience plus my sort of academic work and educational interests, those two things sort of inform a lot of the writing and the observations that I've made. And then that term luxury beliefs.
Well, not to mention just the sheer contrast of your life, right? Because when you're kicking it on the Yale quad,
right.
I'd imagine that most folks did not get there the same way that you got there.
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of expected that. I expected that early on when I was, this was 2015, my first semester on camp. So I got out of the military in August and started classes in September, like literally like a week and a half later. Rented an apartment out there in New Haven, started classes, and early on, I was aware, right? Like these kinds of universities. I knew that these kids were going to come from wealthier backgrounds than me. And, then I looked in the data later and found like, oh yeah, I mean, it makes sense that there are more students at Yale from the top 1% of the income scale than the entire bottom 60%. And so, economic class was just a huge, it was very, it was striking, but in subtle ways, right? Like it wasn't fashionable to like loudly signal wealth in these ostentatious ways. There were sort of subtle material indicators of this. So like the winter of 2015, 2016, December, January, that was sort of like peak Canada Goose jacket era. And so it was like literally every third student you saw at any elite university or early college in New England, you would see a lot of Canada Goose. And it's, these are just like normal looking, nice, sturdy jackets. And I remember I looked up the price. It was $1,000, $900, something like that. And you can get an equivalent nice North Face jacket for like a third of the price. So this was like it was like a subtle indicator. Like if you know Canada Goose, then but if you don't, then you'll be a little bit confused by this trend. And so there were sort of subtle indicators. And then there were cultural and social class differences as well, in addition to the economic element, and those things stood out to me too. But yeah, the money and the income issue, that was a big part of it. There was I've written about this before. I wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about Hamilton and how Hamilton was this big thing on campus around that time too. I think it debuted in 2014, still huge in 2015. And, I remember looking up tickets to see it on Broadway. You can get on a train from New Haven to New York. I think it's about an hour. The tickets were like the cheapest, the cheapest seats for Hamilton, something like $300. And I was attending college on the GI Bill, sort of barely getting by after rent and everything. So that was far exceeded my budget. But yeah, students would talk about it and say, "Oh, have you seen Hamilton? Oh, you haven't seen Hamilton?" That was like a status mark, whether you've seen this. And then you kind of fast forward 5 years later, and then in 2020, once Hamilton was available to watch on Disney Plus, and you could get discount tickets. Many more people had access to this show. It lost its prestige. It lost its luster. It was no longer exclusive. And then suddenly people started turning on it. And now Hamilton actually isn't that exciting. It doesn't have the same sort of cultural sway among the elites that it had, 7 or 8 years ago. So it was interesting for me to sort of, watch that journey over time. Like, when I entered college, Hamilton was the coolest thing ever. And now it's like, okay, Hamilton, it had its moment. But, and now it's like cool to critique it and point out its shortcomings.
Wow. You basically saw the Tulip bubble of the Hamilton play, the rise and the fall.
Yeah, which is
interesting.
Yeah, what I've heard about that. What's is it something about like a crash, like economic? There's like an economic theory or something.
Yeah, so it's basically the archetype of a bubble, and it happened in the tulip market in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
In the I don't know whens, 1400s, 1300s, 1200s. So I think it's the earliest documented shit show in the markets. And what's so fabulous about the tulip crash is the tulip crash looks exactly like the .com bubble. It looks exactly like certain types of cryptocurrencies. It exhibits the same just the same price action, the same emotional fervor. It's the same story over and over and over again. Yeah. But what's happening here with the Hamilton example, and this is like, I've never thought about this, is as things move socioeconomically, it's interesting how they become in vogue versus, this old hat thing. Everyone's got this. And that's something, I think it happens so fast, whether it's socioeconomic or tastemakers, right? Yeah. Like you'll see different types of brands that boom and bust so quickly now with social media. Like, oh, this is the cool thing to have. Okay, everyone's got it. This thing sucks now. I've never looked at that through the lens.
I think you can see this with, this is kind of a similar pattern. Is this related? Not exactly the same, but related with the verification badge on Twitter, right? Like it used to be bestowed on you if you were a member of the cultural elite. You had to be a journalist. You could get it as an academic, but you had to be like a prominent sort of like activist academic. You had to have sort of insider connections, and then of course, if you were like an A-list celebrity or something, it was pretty easy to get a verification badge. But so I remember as as my account started to grow, this was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. I applied for verification, didn't get it, unsurprising. And then I was asking around, I asked other people who had this badge, and then like the information I was getting was actually, unless you were sort of plugged in, like recognized member of the cultural elite or like an A-list celebrity, you basically had to have a contact at Twitter. And I don't exactly know like how much fraud and corruption was going on here, but essentially the deal that the deal that I was offered, was like, sort of like I knew a guy who knows a guy, $15,000 to get verified.
Pay to play, baby.
Right, exactly. So you either had to be famous or rich. Those were the only two ways, right? Because only a richer, if you're famous, you get the blue check, or you have to be rich and pay up. Normal people can't just cough up $15,000 for this, like, it's kind of a frivolous thing on Twitter. I applied because I was getting impersonated. I had two different imposter accounts asking people for money under my identity. And so I applied for this, and then the money, I was like, I'm not paying that. Like, forget it. Like, I'm not going to pay $15,000 for this. And then Elon Musk comes out and offers the verification badge for free. He's like, so all of a sudden everyone buys the blue checks. And he removes them from the legacy accounts, and now you're seeing a lot of the cultural elites who refuse to buy the blue check. You see journalists at legacy media institutions or people who are formerly verified who now refuse to pay the monthly fee, and it's sort of become this counter signal of part of it, I think, is like trying to be anti-Elon and against some of the change that they're making at Twitter. But then also to show that, I'm so above it all that I don't even need the badge anymore. I think that's kind of the game they're playing.
Well, it's so anti, when the status hierarchy disassembles, when you no longer have a true hierarchy from, like you said, getting the badge bestowed upon you, you not playing the game anymore is your own status leap, right?
Yeah.
To a higher tier, because you say, oh, this is the rule. These are the rules of the game. Oh, I don't like this game, so I'm going to jump into my own echelon and to differentiate myself by not playing the game, which is the reverse elitism of not going and paying the $12 or whatever it is to get the Twitter mark. So
it's a sort of a counter signaling thing, right? Like at a certain point you can, the game you're playing is not playing, but that's sort of one of the principles of signaling theory, is that everyone's sending a signal, whether you know it or not, whether you're intentionally trying to send it or not. Saying I'm above the game, I'm not going to play the game. That's a signal in itself of what you think is important versus what you don't. And people who say, often people say, I don't care what people think of me. I'm not playing those games. But the signal you're sending is, I'm so above it all that I'm not going to play, and that in itself is a kind of game as well.
The word that I reach for, right, with this type of behavior is I assign a value judgment to it, because I want to say that's fucking obnoxious, right? It's your, but by the way, I completely my heart goes out to all the folks on Twitter, because the same game happened over here on Instagram and TikTok land. Well, just Instagram, those pixels, at least to me, are worth hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million+ dollars. Right? Those blue pixels completely change what partners you're going to work with. Those pixels change how quickly people respond to your DMs if you're doing brand outreach, if you're doing celebrity outreach. Those pixels there's millions of dollars in those pixels. So it was a very real game, and I'm emotionally, certainly attached to how it was just the rug pull situation. Or the aping of Twitter, which just is like, it doesn't make any business sense whatsoever. But on the flip side, when you see the folks that are playing this anti-game, you go, oh, what a bunch of fucking pains in the ass. At least that's my knee-jerk reaction when I hear about that. And I wonder why I'm doing that.
No, I think it makes sense. Like I'm. I write and talk about status and, use the term status games. But these are not, because you use the game, it's not meant to trivialize it. We say game because it has sort of it elicits predictable behaviors from people, and there are certain sort of informal rules around it. So if it has the sort of trappings of a game, and then people get uptight about the term status. But status is just, it's interesting. Status has these frivolous connotations, but there are other words that are similar to status. I mean, rough synonyms that people don't have the same reaction to. They don't think they're shallow or superficial. So if you say, I want a promotion for the status, people will say, oh, that's so shallow. That's so, but if you say, I want the promotion because I want respect, then it's okay. Then it's appropriate. It's an appropriate desire. But respect and status are rough synonyms. They are the roughly equivalents. If you say, honor, esteem, positive regard, if you talk about wanting to be seen or validated or affirmed, all of those things have to do with status. And status is just a sort of catch-all term that we use, in social psychology. But I think it sort of entered the broader cultural lexicon, and people talk about status now. Outside of academic spheres too, but yeah, the caring about it is not. I don't think it's shallow at all. We naturally care about status. I've written about this on my Substack. I say that status it's a resource as real as water or oxygen. It's something that we're sort of intrinsically desired. It's a fundamental desire, whether we know it or not. It's something that we care deeply about, how we are seen in the eyes of other people. The way that it manifests itself and the particular avenues that we pursue to obtain it can be, I think there's perhaps some room for value judgments there. But in terms of actually wanting the positive regard and admiration of others, that's just completely natural. But yeah, the way that it plays out in social media, it's it's endlessly entertaining. The verification badge versus not, and how much people care about it, but then they don't want to say they care about it. Yeah, very interesting.
So we're all playing these games, but we'll die before we admit we're playing them. We'll die before we say that we care about them.
Yeah.
Why do you think we are masking our interest and obsession? Why is there that natural yuck feeling? And I love what you said. Hey, you swap the word status for respect.
Okay.
Oh, well, now you're just doing your job, man. You know what I mean? More power to you. Yeah. But it's a synonym. Where do you lean on that?
Because it's interesting. Why is it that we resist acknowledging that that's what we want? I think there's an emphasis on authenticity. Especially in Western cultures, but leaving that aside, just generally, we'll just stick in the American context. We care a lot about authenticity, about expressing your true self, and I think there's this general belief that if you're doing something for status, meaning you're doing it for social reasons, for the acknowledgement or validation of other people, then it's not who you really are. You're doing it for you're pretending to be something you're not in order to obtain validation or approval. And, we have this sort of independent-minded streak, this belief in individualism, be your true self, be who you really are, be authentic. And for doing things for status is just, we frown upon it. It's better for status to come as a sort of a side effect of things that you naturally enjoy doing. I'm not wearing the Canada Goose jacket to impress people. I'm wearing it because it keeps me warm. It's for me. But, I think it's, it's people aren't wearing Patek Philippe to tell the time, right?
Sure.
If you want to tell the time, there are less expensive ways to do that. But yeah, we have to sort of tiptoe around it. I think we don't want to acknowledge it. And I think it has to do with, at least one reason has to do with reasons of authenticity.
Part of my whole structure that I've just stumbled upon creating the Rich versus Really Rich series is if you are going directly at status, you're making a mistake. If you're going directly at giving value and offering value, you're on the path you're just on a smoother path to whatever it is that you're trying to do. Because if you go directly at status, there is this thankless backdoor, sketchy sort of life that you're going to lead, and you're going to be fucking miserable because I think status games in themselves aren't adding value. So it's interesting to think of, here's the deal, right? On social media, it's easier to look rich than to get rich, right? So if you're a rational person, meaning you're lazy because you want to conserve resources, you say, well, I could either start a business or I can buy this t-shirt. I'll buy the t-shirt.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a quicker path to getting the side effect, the status boost, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the problem with going directly at the status game is there's no longevity to it, right? Now I got to buy another shirt. Now I got to buy a hoodie, and I've got to buy the suitcase to match, right? It's a slippery slope where you become enslaved, an enslaved consumer chasing status, as opposed to someone who's like, I'm just going to kind of live on the fringes here, build a business, write a book, do whatever the fuck I want, and if it works out, cool. I might get some, perks along the way. So as a model, saying what do I do best and how can I share that with people? I mean, that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I remember reading, these stories of influencers. I think these were Instagram influencers. Apparently, you can pay for like some kind of a photo shoot, some kind of set in which it appears that you're flying in a private jet, but it's really just a little studio. And influencers will, have photographers film them, whatever, sipping some bubbly in a fake private jet that's just, some film studio out in Burbank or something. And that's so funny to me that people are willing to pay. I mean, I'm guessing it must be several hundred, if not maybe thousands of dollars for a few hours on a set like that, just to impress, anonymous strangers on the internet. Presumably, I guess they're converting that into something tangible, but I guess like one of the principles of status is again, it's an end in itself for many people. People will pay material resources, right? Like physical, actual material resources for the invisible resource of status. People will pay money to get followers. People will publish, or people will pay vanity presses to publish a book for them. I just learned about this. I think you and I have talked offline about book publishing before, and there's these vanity presses where if you're a rich person who wants to be, an author, you just pay, some large sum of money, and they'll publish whatever you wrote, slap it in between, cover, and say like, oh, here's your book. We'll get it into bookstores. You just pay a lot of money for it. People will, they'll pay a lot of money to sort of obtain social influence and access in that way to bolster their status credentials. So, this is I think this is sort of an overlooked component of or an overlooked incentive. People talk about money. People talk about like what is it that people are pursuing, and I think status is often the thing that people want, that admiration from others.
You said something really interesting though. It's like what you've done is you've paid for the smokescreen that you added value to society. Isn't that interesting? Because what you've done is you didn't go pay to have a building torn down. You paid to have a book published, knowledge shared with the world, your management strategy, whatever it is, right? Like you've went out there and said, I can buy anything.
Yeah.
I could fucking buy anything, but I choose to buy something that appears as though I'm adding a shit ton of intellectual value into society.
Yeah. That's. I mean, that gets us at the sort of the pathways to status, at least as it's understood in evolutionary psychology. There's a paper. The title is I believe the title is Dominance and Prestige, Two Routes to the Top. And the idea here is that throughout human evolutionary history, there were basically two ways to obtain social status. One way, the sort of evolutionarily older way, and the way that you still see in the animal kingdom, is dominance. And dominance can be understood as sort of using coercion and violence or threats of violence or brutality. It's about people will confer status to you because of the costs you can inflict on them, whether inflicting injuries or humiliation or torture, or just sort of being a bully. You can think of like like alpha males among gorillas or chimpanzees or something, or great ape cousins. They oftentimes obtain status through just sort of being like the biggest and the baddest. Although with chimpanzees, it's a bit more complicated, but more so with gorillas and other mammals. And then the second avenue is with prestige, and this is prestige is obtained by providing value for people, by doing things that people will find beneficial to themselves. So teaching things, being competent, being knowledgeable, being skillful, and prestige is freely conferred. Prestige isn't about the cost you can inflict, but the benefits you can confer. We give status to people freely. So among humans, for example, like a vicious dictator like Joseph Stalin, he obtained his status through dominance, through manipulative tactics, through purging, through violence, and so on. And then someone like Stephen Hawking, or like a Nobel Prize winning scientist, they didn't get their status through those coercive means. They got it through prestige, through doing useful, interesting, groundbreaking work. And we see that work and we admire it, and we think like, oh, I want to be associated with that guy. I give status to them in exchange for them sort of providing value to us. And prestige is an interesting one, because even if they're not directly providing value to you, just by being associated with them or being affiliated with them, you can raise your own status just through osmosis, just through proxy methods, right? Like, so, if you see a famous scientist, you see like Neil deGrasse Tyson or whoever people, the scientists that people know now, you see them in a restaurant, people want to take a picture with them, and get that picture, put it up on Instagram, and it's like, hey, me and Neil deGrasse Tyson together. It's kind of like you're elevating your status a bit just by being seen in the same photo with them, and that is a kind of prestige, right? The benefit they're conferring to you is elevating your status by proxy. And so those are the two kind of methods, and I think in the modern world today, it's much more about prestige, right? Like people, like modern human beings, our psychology naturally sort of resists dominant individuals. We don't like bullies. We don't like people who use like brutal means to climb status hierarchies. We usually condemn that and frown upon it. But prestige, like if we can obtain status or see people obtaining status through the prestige route, we praise that, and so much so that we can sort of become tricked by it. We can be duped by people who, like paying to publish books, or paying for a college degree from a degree mill, or being a kind of a charlatan who claims to have cures or something. We think like, oh, our psychologists can be hijacked by the prestige route pretty easily, I think.
Sure. And well, on social media, dominance is impossible.
Yeah.
And so you only have prestige. But what I believe is happening, that's that yuck feeling that we get with certain things on social media is false prestige, right?
Yeah.
So the way that you falsify prestige is you take the outcomes, again, which are cheaper to rent than to actually do and get, from your value. So you rent the private jet room. Because what the private jet symbolizes is I'm so successful and my time is so valuable that I fly on this jet. Of course, this gets lost in translation because people think just flying on a fucking private jet is luxury in itself, which of course is idiotic. You're still in a box and you got to go from point A to point B. And anyone that's on a private jet that is actually using the private jet in the way it's intended isn't sitting there getting shit-faced. They're going to a meeting, right? So, or they're about to play a concert and whatever it is, right? And then we can throw in all the trust fund, the 20, 30 trust fund kids and, the whoever that, that's Nick, you're wrong about them. They're just getting fucked up and, doing their thing. It's like, okay, but there's a reason why the jet is there, and it's for commerce. It's for smoothing over a really challenging travel schedule, right? I mean, it's like, what could be less sexy than that?
Yeah.
Like, I'm on this jet,
and
I'm on this jet to take more meetings. Like, And that's what private air travel, for the most part, we remove the Saudi, remove all the kind of windfall situations. And then so on social media, we don't see how the sausage gets made.
Yeah,
we just see the end, right? So this is how you can trick people.
Yeah.
Show them the end, they will infer the prestige. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there's a full-blown fucking hurricane going on behind me.
If the internet cuts out or anything, I'll understand.
Yeah, you'll know I'm. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well,
hopefully they find the tapes after this and fucking
keep
put
an
it
eye
online.
on that. Yeah, that was wild, man. Yeah, that was
It's
one of the things
insane.
I was surprised by when I was in Miami. It's like, oh, summertime. June in Miami is going to be nice. And when I was out there, it was like on and off rain. But that's a good point. I mean, I've noticed like over the last couple of years, as I've spent a bit more time, I haven't flown in a private jet before, but I actually just recently flew first class for the first time in my life last week. Peterson Academy, they, people I've worked with and stuff like, I've my employers have managed to foot the bill for some of these excursions and staying in nice hotels. And then one of the things that stood out to me is like a good portion of these people are just working. Right. Like I'm in a nice hotel and I'm in like the little lobby or the cafe area and I see like guys in suits, but they're on their laptops or they're prepping for a meeting or they're hustling. Right. And, first class, it's fewer people, I think, are watching movies in first class than in economy. It seemed like more people were on their laptops or taking meetings or answering emails or had some kind of crazy Excel sheet opened up. And it's like you're in a comfortable, like physically comfortable, but you're still like mentally working nonstop. And it's kind of, I remember seeing that. I was like, it's a bit disappointing in a way. It's like, I had this fantasy of like, oh, when you get to a certain level, you can just chill out and relax. And it's like it's something built in, right? And I guess this kind of gets me to another interesting finding within social psychology research is that people who are already relatively wealthy and high status have the strongest desire for wealth and status. And so basically,
can you say that one more time, just because it cut out a little bit? I want to make sure.
So the basic finding is, and this has been demonstrated in two different studies, one in 2019 and one in 2020. So this has been replicated. People who have the highest level of wealth and status in society also report having the strongest desire for wealth and status. It's the people who have a lot of status and wealth who want more of it. It doesn't seem to satisfy the desire. Obtaining wealth and status doesn't satisfy it. It actually seems to stimulate and elicit a stronger craving for it. And so basically what these studies do, they take objective measures of participants' level of wealth and status. So things like how much money you earn, your level of occupational prestige, what your level of education is. And then they ask about your need for status by asking questions like, to the extent that you agree with statements like, it would please me to be in a position of power, it's important for me to be influential, making a lot of money is important, these kinds of questions. And the higher up people go, the more likely they are to agree with those kinds of statements, which is, I guess, at first glance, it's a bit counterintuitive because you might think that people who are kind of at the bottom of the social ladder, they would have the strongest desire to rise up and have status. And the people who are kind of dispossessed, materially impoverished, sort of overlooked in society, those would be the people who really want wealth and status a lot because they lack it. It's actually not the case. It's the people who are at or near the top of the ladder who report the strongest desire. And I guess there's, another angle of another.
Do you believe that though? Do you believe that?
100%. And I think part of what's going on there is that people who are high in wealth and status, part of the reason why they're there in those positions is because they have that intrinsic desire for it. They have that gremlin in them that's sort of pushing them to keep working, keep striving. And just because you get to a level of material comfort, it doesn't switch off, right? Like a lot of these guys, I've talked to guys like this, like older guys who are very successful in their career, middle-aged and older, and they have this number in mind. Once I reach X million, then I can just go retire, fish, whatever, go hang out in my vacation home. And then they hit that milestone and the number just goes up, or the next thing, the next milestone, the next thing, and it actually doesn't switch off for them. Constant, if you're sort of training yourself to be a workaholic in your early adulthood, it doesn't go away. And I think that may be part of at least what's going on there about why those two things correlate: objective wealth and status and desire for it. Yeah,
because I would take the other side of that argument. It's and I think things are getting mushed together, right? Because just me working on Wall Street for as long as I did, I almost have suffered a sense of like trauma from the intensity that I was required to work, and the intensity that I can't take my eyes off the screen. Take my eyes off the screen, I lose $100 fucking grand. Like this attitude is so built into me that even now, during the course of my day, I can take my eye off the screen for 5 hours and nothing's going to change, right? Like, we're good. We have systems in place. I'm not trading the markets, right? My businesses are not connected to financial markets directly. So it's like, I'm still behaving in this way, and I'm working on it. Okay. Don't worry, Rob, I'll get better one day. And to me, it is a habitual. It is my desire to do great things. It's like, well, I'm going to do great things whether I fucking work like this or not. And I, at least personally, and what I see with those around me is status starts to become irrelevant at some point, because you're like, well, this is what I do. You know, I'm an author, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a yacht broker, whatever it is. And it's just like, at some point you just, I don't know. I don't know if I'm in an entrepreneurship bubble where people are focused on attacking the value problem as opposed to I mean, wouldn't it be nice if I have the ultimate group of bros just doing it the right way? But I see, and my entire my argument, my biggest argument is status. It becomes irrelevant because you see through it at some point in your rise to success or notoriety. It's the guy, and everyone has a story about this. You know, the grandpa that's got a $50 million farm, and he shows up to sweatpants and he haggles the price of everything. It's just, at some point it becomes irrelevant because you didn't go down that path playing that game. You said, I'm going to do good shit. I'm going to create a quality product for a low price. I'm going to write a great book. And you kind of say, oh, well, that's what I do. I write a great, I don't think you immediately would kick back and say, if someone were to say the business that you built is meaningless, I think you'd say, no. You defend your territory, what you've built. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I think of course there's going to be a lot of variation. I like to think that, I'm in a similar circumstance that, to some extent I've managed to disengage, at least from like the explicit and overt pursuit of status, the way that, at least from my perspective, right, that a lot of other people who attend places like Yale, they go into consulting and finance and Wall Street and, those kinds of occupations where it really is like sort of this overt desire to get ahead. But on the other hand, like just because there is variation doesn't mean like the overall average isn't there. That it makes a lot of sense to me that, based on what I've seen, at least, like in the aggregate, that people who are doing well for themselves, they don't really disengage. Maybe a few, particularly anomalous individuals manage to do so. But I think by and large, people who are chasing some kind of accomplishment, once they reach it, seldom do they decide that they're sort of settled and they have no more desire, or sort of go the other way and decide to withdraw and just enjoy their riches. I don't see that happen that often. I kind of wish it was the case. It's almost disappointing when I hear their stories, because I have this fantasy too of like, when I'm 50 or 60, semi-retired, I'll continue to write and continue to sort of recreationally, share my thoughts and do something productive. But I won't have that stress of, being consumed by ambition. I think it does naturally sort of taper off with age. There's sort of personality changes in the lifespan, that people do become a bit less, a bit less focused on worldly success over time, especially sort of once they've achieved it. But I don't think it ever fully goes away for most people. Some people, maybe the case it does.
It's stressful for the one doing it, but if you're the one benefiting from the fruit of the business and the car that you've designed and the course that you've built that's educating people, you say, don't give up, Rob. Keep doing shit forever. Because I'm benefiting from your labor.
That was an old, that's an old principle from Adam Smith. I don't remember if it was in The Wealth of Nations or in Theory of Moral Sentiments, but this was one of his observations, paraphrasing, but it's what you said, right? About Adam Smith, it's like the parable of Baker's son or something like this. But, like imagine this young man who really has, the strong ambitions to build a business, to whatever, to get rich. And he has these fantasies of once I build the business and sell these goods and so on, I'm going to retire and get rich and then I'll be happy. And he finds over the course of his journey of doing this, at the end of it, he's no happier than when he started. But in the process, right, he employed people, he provided value, he provided goods, whatever, like people extracted benefit from the business that he built. And so as a side effect of his ambitions, other people became happy, although he himself really didn't. And I really like that. I think there was I remember the first time I read that, I was floored by it. And it's sort of in this sort of flowery, eloquent 18th century language. And it's a really nice, a nice passage from him. I think there is something to be said there about that idea, that even if you yourself aren't as happy as you thought you would be, other people do get value from, if you're writing a book or building a product or something, you are helping other people.
And the nice thing that does too is, there's a lot of young entrepreneurs or young go-getters that feel guilty going after and building something big or earning a lot of money. And my thing is, this model immediately wipes away that guilt. It's if you didn't follow your passion and you didn't go and do the thing that you love to do and sweat and build, I wouldn't be benefiting from your bread, from your beautiful bread. And I wouldn't be benefiting from your software that allows me to automate 40% of what I do. So it's this weird thing where I occupied a place in a like a massive company at one point on Wall Street, and now I'm kind of off on my own doing my own thing. And it's easier you see the connection a lot easier when you're off doing your own thing in your small business. So the baker's son, man, I didn't realize that was Adam Smith, because I'm pretty sure I got to change the fucking words in my book now, because I think I was talking about a baker's son, man. It's the best example, because it's you rob society when you don't do the thing that you love and you don't build the thing that you want to build. So withholding that for whatever reason, by the way, just doing something else is actually withholding it. So, hey, my mom wants me to be a lawyer. I'll never be a baker. Okay, I'll be a lawyer. Well, you'll be fucking miserable, and you won't bake the bread for the rest of the world to enjoy. And my argument, my sort of the big argument is, and you won't be as successful either.
Yeah, if you don't do the thing that you love, you're robbing people. You're withholding them of things that could potentially change their life, and I guess robbing yourself in some way. I mean, I think like the whole, one of the ideas about status, one of the findings about it is, the direct pursuit of it doesn't seem to increase happiness very much. But building relationships and doing things that matter to people, that actually does seem to have an effect on well-being and on meaningfulness. And it's one of these Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, he writes about this, about how if you chase happiness, right, if the happiness is your goal, then you'll continue to miss it. It actually doesn't work to be happy, but happiness will come as a side effect of doing things that are meaningful to other people, for helping other people, doing things that matter. And then happiness as a byproduct is the only way that you can actually achieve it, is by not actually chasing it directly, ironically enough. And I think there's something here with status as well, that, if you chase status in itself, it'll sort of feel hollow. But if you do things that matter, that make a difference for people, and attain status as a byproduct of that, then it will have sort of enduring feelings of fulfillment attached to it.
Enduring feelings, and another way to put that is, it's cheaper to maintain. It's expensive to buy prestige and to maintain it. You want to talk about the monthly cost of purchasing unearned prestige? Dude, it's a tax it's a death tax on the person who is carrying it around, because it just haunts you, and you can never get away from it. Because if we're going to agree, hey, my feeling is these status boosts and these feelings of accomplishment, right? There is something chemical and something that feels good about that, right? You put the book out, it hits the shelves. You walk through the bookstore, that feels fucking great, right? Definitely not going to argue with you there. And that thing continues to pay dividends over time. But imagine you just say, I'm going to look like the coolest author on earth. I'm going to live in Cuba in this beautiful home, rundown home, and live this rustic life. Or I'm going to live, Cuba's probably a terrible example. I'm going to live in the south of France, and I'm going to drive a vintage Peugeot, and just like the savage cost of faking that, I think would end up killing you.
Yeah. There is that. I think like living a lie, doing things that are kind of, fabricated, or like if you yourself know you're being inauthentic. I mean, there's got to be some kind of a mental cost to that too. But I can see it. I can see in a way. I understand how it can be tempting to just do those sort of pursue cheap and frivolous. Like the appearance or the trappings of success or accomplishment or status, without actually doing anything that benefits yourself or anyone else. And it's easier than ever now to do that, right? I mean, with social media, you can just craft this image of yourself, and even like your literal physical appearance with filters and photos and all these apps you can do to manipulate and change. And it's just we sort of fall for it's a sort of easy, I think, like psychologically there's something here where we do sort of naturally respond more to signals in many cases rather than the underlying quality. An example I've given before to sort of intuitively understand this is like, imagine if you have a choice, so in one example, you can sleep with someone who is very physically attractive. They show you verified medical records indicating that they're just riddled with infectious illnesses. Or you can sleep with someone who has, like visibly deformed facial features and misshapen, uneven length limbs, just looks like a very unusual, peculiar person. But then they show you verified medical documents showing that they're completely clean bill of health, nothing wrong with them whatsoever. Physically, they look a little odd, but on paper, everything is fine. And I think a lot of people would find that choice. You have to sleep with one of them. I think people would find this a difficult choice because, we respond to the signals here being appearance, right? Appearance, we use it psychologically as a cue for health, for fitness, for all of these things, right? Like, and we didn't evolve an environment in which we would respond to physician's notes in a medical document. We responded to physical features. That was how we sort of could roughly determine whether someone was healthy or not. And I think like in a way we could extend that to social media where we're responding to the appearance of status rather than the underlying accomplishment. If we see someone do something impressive, and it's not videoed or recorded or shown, the whole picture didn't happen, then we're just unimpressed with it. But if we see someone seemingly do something interesting online, then we just respond to it, and people are sort of hijacking that now.
It's tempting, man. It's like, leaving a little piece of cheese out for the mouse. Like, it's like you got to just grab it because it's easier, cheaper than ever. In fact, if you assume, that most young adults in the U.S. are getting some kind of smartphone earlier than ever, they're getting access to manipulate and to position themselves in a cheaper way than ever before, right? At a younger age.
I've seen undergrads, when I teach classes, I see undergrads who, they'll tell me about how they'll, finally they've chosen the perfect filter, the perfect photo, the perfect everything for Instagram. And then they'll spend hours trying to find like the perfect quote from the perfect author to put as the caption underneath it. And it's like, oh, am I going to go with Emily Dickinson or James Joyce or some like, fashionable new author that is kind of like just like the perfect amount of obscure, like known but not too well known, and like just like, man, this sounds exhausting. But they know if they choose I don't know if they know, but they suspect or believe if they choose the right photo with the right quote and from the right person and so on, that this will maybe get them an extra 30 likes or something. And I'm like, that's a lot of effort for, this invisible material resource. The number of likes on your Instagram account, it doesn't, you can't eat likes, right? It's not a real thing, but it matters to people to get, 200 likes versus 150 or whatever it is.
You can't eat likes. And this is where I'm going to head, I think, in my next personal study, is how the phrase was rich and famous. Okay. Now you get to pick. You can just be famous.
Right? That's right.
Which is really interesting, because I don't think the cat is out of the bag about that yet. Everyone just assumes it's still rich and famous. But now it's rich or famous and or famous. So you get the little and or slash right there. And I think that's where we find ourselves in a lot of trouble and turmoil. And if you're going to point fingers at social media, certainly, e-com sellers are loving it, and they have no problem with social media. But where you could point is the tiring status games that ultimately don't yield anything potentially real or transferable into goods and services, or a better place to lay your head at night, or higher quality, healthier food. So when you forget this, and you play the game as I have for fucking, are you kidding me, dude? Like, creating content that will generate the maximum amount of laughs, likes, and shares, as opposed to what's the thing that's going to like get the message across the best, right? Or what's the thing that's going to drive some value forward? And sometimes those things intersect. They definitely don't have to be mutually exclusive, but I've played these games where I'm just like, wait, why did I make that like, what purpose was that post for? Was it for digital, dopamine and this feeling of that rush of getting a lot of likes and shares? It's, from my perspective, you do that enough, and I'm fortunate enough to be business minded to start to pivot and to build strategy. But I know a heck of a lot of, called creators now. We're not called influencers, or called creators, whoever.
I didn't get that memo, but I like that.
Yeah. So please don't.
Creators now.
Creators. It sounds a lot better. And I know a lot of creators that are broke and have no path forward, and are in a state of depression. And my heart goes out to them, because no one fucking told them. No one warned them. It's like an audience doesn't necessarily equal money. It's not getting a part in a Hollywood film, where after you get a part in a Hollywood film, you're more likely to get another part. Oh, and by the way, that part is paid. It's not a free role, it's not Jonah Hill going and doing Wall Street for going and do the Wolf of Wall Street for $60,000. That means he's going to jump and triple his rate for the next movie because it's a Scorsese flick. It's truly non-transferable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've seen these interesting discussions around, status versus money, and how how fungible status is. Can you trade one for the? Is it easier to pay for status, or is it easier to sell status for money? And I think it very much depends. And I think like we're sort of seeing this play out now in the social media realm of influencers or creators, trying to figure out ways to monetize whatever sort of niche micro fame that they attain, and seeking brand endorsements, or trying to maybe writing a book or self-publishing something and seeing if their audience is willing to buy it. And I'm seeing like it kind of depends now. It's yeah, it depends on what platform you're on, what the product you're selling is, what because I think there's this, for a lot of people, they're so used to getting content for free that they're unwilling to actually pay a creator for whatever product they sell. They build the audience over a few years, and now they have some, whatever, 100,000 million followers, and they gave everything for free, and now they're saying, hey, here's this product, and people are like, well, I've been getting things free for free. Am I going to pay now? Like, what's the,
Sure.
Why would I do that? And I think it kind of depends on a lot of different factors, what you're selling, how it's going to benefit people. And an audience alone doesn't necessarily convert into money. There was an interesting article in the New York Times a year or two ago about this, about actual like A-list celebrities, and how there's this discussion in the book publishing world about, because they'll just immediately give $1 million advance to, I don't know, Johnny Depp or whoever, some famous person, with the assumption that, if Johnny Depp and his ghostwriter write a memoir, naturally it's going to be a bestseller, and actually what tends to happen is they don't sell nearly as many as they thought they would. Like, name alone isn't enough, and I think they're slowly starting to realize that fame alone isn't going to move copies, and there has to be some other factor involved there. And it's a shame, like, especially young people, right? When young people fall for this, like, I'll just get 100,000 TikTok followers and I'll get rich, and I think that doesn't really happen very often.
The idea here that is just sort of developing is number one, it doesn't. The 100 TikTok followers doesn't immediately mean you're going to make X, Y, and Z. And the celebrity thing is really interesting. I think fame is becoming more common, as nonsensical and oxymoronic as that sounds, right? It's like fame is becoming. We might have to redefine fame at some point, right? Because my personal view is that everyone on planet Earth can find an audience now.
Yeah.
Everyone. And by audience, sure. More than 5 people. I don't mean 1 million or 100 million. Everyone on planet Earth can find a relatively large audience, because we are social, interesting, unique people, and there's niches inside of niches inside of niches, and you can keep going as long as you're willing to stick your head on a phone screen a couple hours a day. You will build an audience, period. And therefore, if fame is more common and influencer status is more common, it doesn't mean that Brad Pitt's going to sell anything. I think now it comes down to product market fit and influencer market fit, creator market fit. So, and I've played around with this. I'm still playing around with this because, number one, I'm a massive tinkerer and iterator, and so I have no problem, fucking around with a lot of different things at the same time. But it's like your example of was it Johnny Depp or your Johnny Depp or Brad Pitt? Like, do I really want to read their book? Or do you want to read about how who's the guy that did Casamigos? George Clooney. Do you want to read about George Clooney's his tequila tasting? All of a sudden you're starting to build fit, right? Because do I give a fuck about this guy's life story? No, but hey, he built this. He must know so much about tequila. Let me read the the Clooney guide to tequila.
That'd be cool.
Like, to me, that's when it would be cool. Because what we're doing now is we're starting to use our fucking heads a little bit, right? Instead of just saying fame is a blunt instrument, as if we're talking about Marilyn Monroe. Like, guys, we've moved beyond the one star environment.
Yeah, way beyond it. I when I talk to podcaster friends and stuff, I really see the splintering of fame. What you're talking about here. I talked to a friend of mine, and this was, I'm embarrassed to say this, because this was less than a year ago, and he was asking me about Mr. Beast. Like, oh, did you see this Mr. Beast video? And I was like, who's that? I didn't even know who this was. And apparently he, at least at this point, roughly a year ago, he was the largest, had this largest subscriber base or whatever on YouTube, or at least one of them. massive audience. I had no idea who he was. And then to me, so I'm in like the sort of the writer Substack world. And like, I've sent this, some of these podcaster friends, YouTube friends, hey, here's an interesting piece from so-and-so. And they're like, oh, what's his wheelhouse? What does this person write about? I'm like, you don't know this writer? Like, what? This, to me, this is like a big deal. This guy's a great writer. And so we're off in our own little siloed bunkers of, some people are doing YouTube podcasts, that realm. And then others are writing and others doing this, that, and the other. And then probably within those, right? Like, I'm sure people who are, spend a lot of time on YouTube now with the algorithms and everything, they may not even know who all the big hitters are on YouTube itself. And I'm probably overlooking a lot of Substackers and so on. So it really is like, my micro fame has replaced fame. Or you can have a large audience or a large-ish audience. And that's kind of enough, to sustain you, if you play your cards right. That whole like Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans idea. I think a lot of people probably took that a bit too seriously. But I think it can work. And now, we're seeing like, whatever. I watch YouTube. I have, I pay for YouTube Premium and I watch stuff, and I had no idea who Mr. Beast was. Like, this is kind of the new world order now.
I got YouTube. I'm cool, man. I got YouTube. The way that I look at this is the problem back in the day as an individual, you could just be you could just be famous because there was an industry to support you and a structure where here's your manager and here's the film that you star in and this film makes 100x and then you do this. There was a track, right? And it was something where, hey, I've got my skill set. It's acting, right? And I'm just going to do the acting. Now you could still pull it off as long as you can act, film, write, edit, be a business-minded person, iterate, have longevity, take risk. Yeah, you could pull it off. I think everyone can pull it off as long as you can pull off those 10 other jobs, right? Those 10 hats. So on one hand, we're living in the most empowered moment in time where you can make and curate an audience in the hundreds of thousands from your, parents' basement. But it is up to you to go. No, there is no white knight coming out to help you make money. In fact, my argument is anyone that does show up to help you make money in the social media landscape is more evil than the caricatures of record label execs, from the 70s. So it's so up to you. It's so up to you. It's so up to you. It's fucking terrifying.
Yeah. And I wonder if we're diluting the prestige of some of these avenues, these occupations, right? Like back in the day that, if you said you made films, that was like you worked for a major film studio. It was very prominent. It was very difficult to break into. Like it just you would meet very few. And now if you say it, people don't really know what you mean anymore. It's like, do you film documentaries for your own page on YouTube? Do you work for a major film studio? Do you self-fund? Is it a Kickstarter thing? Like what does that mean that you're a filmmaker? Or if you're a writer, back in the day, it meant you were like an author or you were a columnist at a major newspaper. Now it's like, you run a little blog online that 12 people read. Like what does it mean to do these kinds of creative jobs anymore? And in some ways, like the terms are becoming confused, and now no one really knows, right? Like like where to sort of mentally place you. This is one of the things that we do as humans too, is like we sort of want to know roughly. This is why we ask people, what do you do for work? We sort of, where do you live? We're roughly mentally trying to categorize them in a status spectrum and a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Are you higher or lower than me? Are we roughly the same? Like how am I supposed to behave with you? We encode things like age and gender right away to know how to interact with someone. We behave differently with older versus younger people. We behave differently with men versus women. And then one of the other things is we're trying to get a rough sense of their status. And so, now when someone says they make films or they're a writer, it's like, okay, now it's like, now you're trying to figure out what's the next question I can ask to figure, like, what does that mean now?
Oh man. I mean, this was my life in New York for 10 years. I mean, you go to everyone went to the same bar on Wall Street. Everyone goes to Dorian's on the Upper East Side, where everyone who's in this certain set and thinks of themselves in this certain rustic, rich kind of preppy way. And you turn up there and you jockey for micro positions, over, however many vodka sodas you can handle. Right. So that atmosphere, I vowed I would never, ever return to that fucking place. Not Dorian's. Great bar. The atmosphere of micro position jockeying is misery. And it is just pointless because let's put it this way. If you're on your own mission, I don't give a shit if you've got a YouTube channel or you're the fucking, or, you're whatever. It's like, and I'm pleasantly surprised when I find someone who's accomplished. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, because I'm not trying to get something out of the interaction in a way that perhaps I once was back in my 20s. So it's just like, I just don't care as much anymore. I am terrible. I actually don't even ask people half the time what they do. I want to decide if I like you well before I know what you do. So I delay that moment as long as possible. Or I try to. I'm fucking, human too. Because I'm like, I want to just like you before I know what you do. So then that gets in the way, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's wise. I mean, that's one of those things. I think it's difficult for a lot of people to break out of that habit of like the micro positioning, who can provide opportunities to who should I be talking to, who should I be spending my time with, and knowing someone's job before knowing who they are, so that you can figure out, should I spend time with them? Should I build a relationship with them? And I think for time, this is one of those things I like from the angel investor philosopher Naval Ravikant about escaping competition through authenticity, right? Of just like, this is one of those things about being a creator. If you do it right, you can sort of, to some extent, I don't think you can ever completely break out of the status games, but you can help yourself to at least think about them differently and help to disengage by doing your own thing, right? Like if you're working in finance or consulting or a lot of these other jobs, I guess you can change your mindset to some degree, but I think, you'll naturally compare yourself to other people who are roughly of the same position as you within the firm. And it's just, by design, senior positions are more scarce and you're competing against people for them. And academia is like this too. I've been talking about these other occupations. I should be focusing more on academia. Academia is the worst at this, of like the very limited number of Ph.D. slots to be a graduate student and obtain a Ph.D. is so brutal. And then to go from PhD to get a good postdoc, to become a professor, to a tenure track job, like that funnel, it gets more and more narrow, and the level of sort of duplicity and cutthroat behavior around that of like, I think this is one reason why you see, we don't have to get into this, but just a lot of the sort of politics and a lot of the crazy stuff going on in academia right now. I think a lot of it is actually, is sort of window dressing for people who are just trying to jobs and are willing to use whatever strategy is necessary because of how competitive it is. When you step out of that and do other kinds of jobs, right? Like do something like becoming a creator or something where you are earning a living and building an audience and doing these kinds of things through your own ideas, through your own sort of unique perspective and those kinds of things. I think there's a lot of value there, but within, I see a lot of envy and stuff within the creator world, but just, I think it can be easier to get out of that sort of habit.
For me, I think it's why I'm such a champion of becoming an entrepreneur, no matter what scale that is. If it's small, medium, or large, or fucking, supersize, like you escape a lot of the things that you were just discussing in academia. Yeah. And we could use the Wall Street example because picking on myself is easy. I've been there, done that. It's painful to make that your strategy for the rest of your life, to one rung up. Yeah. So your life will look like a grind and a slog because the system in which you're in is designed to progress in that way. Someone has to fucking die for me to get promoted. Somebody has to move
fired.
to Texas, get fired, fucking get caught, and doing weird shit in the bathroom to get, and then that's what opens up opportunity. And then you say, well, if my performance isn't the sole reason why I'm progressing, now I'm going to get nasty. Yeah. See, this is when you're, even in a meritocracy, when you're in a bureaucratic meritocracy, like a consulting firm or a bank or something like that, then you say, politics, skullduggery, catching someone in a lie, getting someone in trouble. It's, I don't blame anyone for doing it. You got to get ahead somehow. Otherwise, your life is just a fucking Groundhog's Day over and over and over and over again. Can you blame people for, using the skullduggery and...
Oh, no, I completely understand it. Like, I think it's a logical or rational approach, but it can be, like, if you enjoy it, right? Like, this is one of those things where I guess I take a sort of a neutral position on this. Like, personally, I don't enjoy that, but I know people who do. Like, I know people, I have friends who work in finance. I have friends who are in academia, people who are pursuing tenure track jobs, and they kind of enjoy a little bit of that, the cunning involved to get promoted, to the strategies and all of those things. Like, they take some pleasure in it. But for a lot of people, I think, like, they don't do it because they enjoy it. They think that they're doing it because they have to, or because they want approval, or because they want some kind of validation. They think like, oh, once I reach that, that next rung up, then I'll be happy. Then they get there and realize it's actually not. So what? Maybe the next rung, maybe the next one. It doesn't work. So sort of taking a step back and trying to understand, what is it that you really want? And this is a question I get. People will ask, they think that because I study psychology, that I can tell them what they should do. And really, it's like the principles of psychology, of the social sciences, a lot of these things, and they can't really tell you what to do. Like, what you should do, that's kind of like, that's like a philosophical question. And it's sort of, you have to tailor it based on your own preferences and desires and so on. What psychology can help you do is, once you have that goal in mind of what you want to do, maybe it will help you to get there. It'll help you to formulate an approach to get there, but it won't tell you what that thing that you should be pursuing should be. That's a sort of personal philosophical question that requires, I think, some reflection and deliberation. And so, as I'm bad mouthing academia and all these things, like, I'm doing it because I didn't enjoy it, a lot of it, but other people might.
It's interesting too. I mean, my next sort of topic that I'm going to tackle is, you can't look, just like you said, you can't look outward for advice in terms of specifics. You can look outward in terms of models and principles, but you can't say, what business should I? People, 10,000 people DM me and they say, what business should I start? Yeah. I'm like, how the hell should I know, dude? I don't know anything about you. Are you interested in jazz guitar? Are you an engineer? Because that would have a lot to do with what business you start, right? And when confused, if you're in the middle of the ocean and you're struggling, you're just looking for a fucking a lifesaver, a life vest, someone to throw something in the water that you could float on, right? And I think when people are really struggling and they're like, I got to get out of this job. I hate flipping burgers, or I hate folding clothes as I did at one point. I hate running in the back to get a 9.5 for Mr. Jones. I got to do something else. And in that moment, I could see that being a lot like falling overboard and saying, please God, just someone else tell me what the fuck to do. Yeah. Because I don't know what to do out here.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, I think they want, I think a lot of people have an inkling of what they want, but they're aiming for a higher authority, someone they respect or admire to sort of bestow permission, right? Like, secretly, maybe the guy who wants to start a guitar store, whatever it is, some kind of company, they want to do that, but they ask, should I do it? Because they want, they want to sort of outsource the difficulty of that decision to some higher authority. And I think that's one of those things I try to keep in mind too. People ask for advice. It's like, well, what is it that you really want? Are you asking for what I really think, or do you have it in mind and you just hope that I'll tell you what you want to hear? Yeah, it's I think the advice giving game is tricky. And yeah, when you're young and aimless and adrift and you're looking for anyone to just point you in a direction, I think that's I mean, in a way, it's okay as long as you actually take action. I think like the worst thing is actually inaction, especially when you're young and you can fail. Just go do something. Something is better than just sort of aimlessly, stuck in a menial job that's not fulfilling you. If you want to take a risk and try something new, something exciting, I think, well, usually I err on the side of action, especially when young.
You have to bombard against the universe to have opportunity. It's like you can't hide away and expect things to pop, into your crosshairs because you're in the same spot, and that same spot isn't working out. What are we gotta get here because this is so fascinating to me, and it's a little steer. What are luxury beliefs?
Luxury beliefs. So this is a framework I've developed over the last few years. Luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while often inflicting costs on the lower classes. And there are, different components that bolster this framework. But the general claim here is that to a large extent, luxury beliefs have replaced luxury goods. And so for me, this idea starts with Thorstein Veblen. He was an economist and sociologist in the 19th century. He wrote a book called The Theory of the Leisure Class in 1899. I read this book roughly around the time that I started undergrad at Yale at age 25 after, living in foster homes and being in the military, just being in very different environments. Suddenly I'm planted in this very affluent environment, interacting with people I'd never, I'd never interacted with before, hearing all kinds of unusual opinions and beliefs. And so Veblen's idea, the central idea of that book is that because we can't be sure of people's financial status, the way that we sort of evaluate people's social position is through seeing whether they could expend material resources, money, on expensive material goods, luxury goods, things like tuxedos and top hats and evening gowns, monocles, pocket watches. So this is 1899.
That's what I was going to wear to this interview, but I figured I'd dress
your Mr.
down.
Peanut monocle.
Yeah, I was in black tie, and I just
dressed up like the Monopoly
throw
man.
a suit on. Yeah, put my PJs on. You know what I mean?
like industrial, like an oil baron from the turn of the century.
Those are my spirit animals. Continue.
And time-consuming, expensive hobbies, things like golf and beagling and attending lavish ceremonies and events and all these. And so Veblen's, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek book, but he basically said, even things like butlers are status symbols. They serve this ostensible functional purpose of assisting the wealthy person, with their needs. But there's also this signaling purpose here. Butlers are status symbols, and their purpose is to show other wealthy people, hey, I have a butler, so look, I'm just as rich as you. We're all sort of playing the status game of look how much money I have because I can afford these expensive things. So a few decades later, Pierre Bourdieu wrote this book, Distinction, a social critique of the judgment of taste. He was a French sociologist, and a lot of his book, published in 1979, echoed Veblen's ideas. But Veblen Bourdieu in 1979, he coined this term cultural capital. And his idea was basically that people would convert economic capital into cultural capital through things like tastes and habits and customs and opinions. And, so at that point in the mid-20th century, rich people would send their kids to expensive private boarding schools, and, people would learn about things like art history, wine, things that had no direct functional purpose for survival. Only people who were very wealthy and who didn't have to work sort of back-breaking manual labor jobs could afford to expend a lot of time and resources learning about how to speak about the nuances of different flavors of wine and the different types of art.
You're
Yeah.
gonna make it if you don't know if you don't know the difference between Pinot Noir and Cab
Sure.
Sauvignon, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it only matters
Uh,
to a certain slice
yeah.
where it matters to
Right.
everybody
That
else
upper
in that.
echelon, and the ability to communicate was a sort of a signaling mechanism of, like if you can speak about wine in an educated way, then I can tell, oh, you and I are of the same social strata.
Right. I can relax
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
I can relax now. I can kick back.
And so the luxury beliefs idea sort of builds off of these old school sociological frameworks, and now the idea is that cultural capital is expressed through these luxury beliefs, holding unconventional and bizarre and peculiar ideas that are at odds with what most people in society would find reasonable, the sort of the mainstream opinion. And so, like an example of this, a recent example, is the defund the police movement. So, this idea was championed by a lot of members of the cultural elite. There were multiple op-eds. There was a famous one published in the New York Times, I think in late 2020, called "We Literally Mean Abolish the Police." And so this was championed by affluent people who went to expensive universities, who had a lot of cultural capital. But then I actually dug into the survey data published in 2020 and 2021. And when you break down the survey data by income, the highest income category in the U.S. was the most supportive of defunding the police, and the lower income categories were less supportive of defunding the police.
Wow.
And to me, this makes sense because the people who are going to be the most affected by low resourced, inadequate police departments and an absence of law enforcement in general are poor, low-income people. I mean, so naturally, if you live in a gated community, and there were reports of this in 2021, of wealthy people in Chicago hiring off-duty police officers to patrol their areas, once the defund the police movement had sort of kicked off and been implemented into policy, and just sort of generally shifted social attitudes around law enforcement, such that police officers were just sort of less interested in actually fulfilling their duties because attitudes had changed and they didn't want to necessarily put themselves in certain kinds of situations. And then there were a lot of wealthy people in New York City who fled to the Hamptons in 2020 as these movements were kicking off. And so, violent crime skyrocketed 2020 till 2022. I think it's slowly starting to taper off and kind of, it's just sort of returning to lower levels. But in the meantime, this was a very popular position, very fashionable position to take. People suggested, social workers, we need to reimagine and rethink and reapproach law enforcement. And all that had really happened was that very affluent people, well-to-do people, remained relatively unscathed by crime, and a lot of poor people were being victimized by increased levels of criminal activity.
Right, because when 12 officers, right, decide to take the month off or get downsized, you don't notice it from your castle and behind your private guard. You just go, huh, it must have worked. Nothing's changed. And meanwhile, in the part of town that you've never been to, shit's getting fucking crazy because there's no authority anywhere to be found. In this hypothetical situation. Did this actually ever take root? Like, how many there was? I'm assuming that the must have been hard to hire law enforcement for a while, and probably still is.
Yeah, there was, there were reports of, record high numbers of police officers filing for early retirements, shortfalls in recruitment, a lot of police officers just straight up resigning or quitting. And I mean, it's if you're a young, competent, capable person who wants to make a difference, again, things are kind of changing. I think we're kind of returning to, some semblance of understanding here, but 2 years ago, I don't think any young person would have been like, oh, I want to be a police officer. Things look like promising for this career field. And so I think they were having very difficult times recruiting. And I think like a lot of that attitude, the defund the police attitude on behalf of, very, very wealthy, very educated people. And I don't know if I should say very wealthy. I should just say affluent. This is sort of like the top quintile, top decile, the top 10, top 20%.
We're not talking about
Right.
we're not talking about billionaires
Right. We're talking
here.
about like upper middle class and above.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is there's a sort of, because if you grew up in very advantaged circumstances, oftentimes your only contact with people who are low income, who are poor, who are marginalized, dispossessed. It's only through like media reports and through pop culture. And often the only time a person from a poor marginalized community receives a lot of attention in the media is if they are a criminal offender. The media is not going to cover someone who makes $14 an hour folding clothes or washing dishes, or just like putting in their 40 hours a week, clocking in, clocking out, and going home. And that's the typical life of a sort of lower middle class, working class, or poor person. Is they just kind of work a menial job, do what they can, take care of their loved ones, and obey the law and go home. That's like the vast majority. Most poor people don't commit crimes. But if a poor person does sort of service in the media for criminal offenses, suddenly it's like, oh, the reason why they did those things is because they're poor. There's this sort of survivorship bias thing going on here, or through pop culture, where again, like if like Hollywood's never going to like make a Netflix show, or maybe they have, but it's just not going to get the same level of attention of someone, again, like working kind of a menial job, clocking in, clocking out, trying to take care of their family. Like those shows don't really get made of just sort of a life, day in the life of ordinary sort of lower income people. But what captures the audience's attention, what captivates people is some poor person who's been mistreated, and then suddenly they, like Walter White, right? They break bad and like, I'm tired of being an underpaid school teacher. I'm going to cook meth. I'm going to commit crimes. I'm going to be a drug kingpin. And that's sort of for a lot of people, that's their only contact with what it's like to be poor and mistreated. And so they sort of, interestingly, they sympathize with criminals because they don't see the other side of that. They don't see the victims of it, right? Like you don't see the victims of Walter White's meth empire, right? Like no one's going to watch a show about those people. They'll watch a show about the criminal, but not the victims of the drug distribution or of yeah. So anyway, that's sort of the idea here, is like they have a very narrow lens into those lives, and this naturally distorts what they think being poor is like. And most poor people, like they're the victims of crime, not the perpetrators.
Right. Well, I just have the perfect vision. It's the vision of the interviews with the picketers who are saying, this is why we should defund the police. And there's no one's going into the single mother's apartment and saying, hey, what do you think about this? Right. We're chilling. We're chilling with the picketers, who look awfully, stylish out there. And we're not going in and asking, hey, by the way, did crime pick up since this bullshit started?
Yeah, what do you think of this? Like, what are your thoughts on what's happening?
We just wanted to close the feedback loop. Has your day gotten easier or harder since this whole thing started?
Yeah, how are things going for the kids now? How are things going for your family, the neighborhood, the community? Is it better or worse than it was, 3 or 4 years ago? And yeah, those questions.
We're interviewing the protesters, but we're not actually interviewing the folks that are the end users of the new system.
Yeah, not interviewing the people who can't afford to go to protest because they have to work and provide for their families and try to make ends meet, right? If they're working 3 or 4 minimum wage jobs trying to pay the bills, they're not going to be able to take an afternoon off and go picket and protest. So it's a different, different groups, different populations, and we're paying attention more to one than the other.
My sort of weird experience is that I had a high status, your classic Ivy League to Wall Street, to that, playing that game and working in that environment, to having no status at all in New Orleans when I quit. And I said, I need to find out who Nick is. And I moved to New Orleans to be a blues guitar player, blues musician.
Sounds fun.
I found, it was crazy. It almost killed me. I found my bandmates on Craigslist. They had done time. They were true badass motherfuckers and they could play. And I found this group and I didn't tell anyone how I got there or where I came from. I was just Nick, the guy that played blues guitar. And I had spent all my money throughout this process, which was quite a bit of money, building the band and funding the records and all this stuff, right? Until I had no money left. And then I was working in a clothing store for $14 an hour. And I remember telling the manager, the store manager, I said, hey, you know, I used to like work on a trading floor. I know a lot about how you're kind of accounting for your sales. It doesn't really make any sense. And she was like, Nick, go get a 9.5 for Mr. Jones. And please just yeah. I don't even believe you. You know, when you see someone on the street and they're just kind of babbling to themselves, that's who I was. And that violent stripping of my status, but keep in mind, when you were trading millions of dollars of bonds on for an investment bank, that skill set is useless in New Orleans. Yeah. It's literally a useless skill set, right? So I had no status, and I had no value. Yeah. It's right. So I had this experience where I died on the status hierarchy. I sort of died and then had an opportunity to be born again into the way that I wanted to go. So through this conversation, I'm kind of realizing that I spent a good chunk of my life going for the status, the easy status. Hey, it's not that hard to get good grades. You know, it's not that hard to get into Cornell and just tough it out and, you know, just not flunk out. Like, I'll pull this off. Okay. We can do this. Okay, then we're going to get to Wall Street. It's getting a little harder, you know, and that's the game that I played. Yeah. And it took me losing everything to say, okay, we're just going to do valuable shit for people that I don't mind doing. And that I hope you could skip. By listening to this, I hope you could skip a step, because the empowering part of this discussion, I think, is you have a choice.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in a sort of an intellectual, rational way, you can understand that. But then I think the problem is, especially when you're young and you're, you know, the desire for status is at its highest, I think, you can know something and still not act on it, right? The emotions attached to status pursuit, the social environment you're in. Yeah, if you're at a fancy college campus and everyone around you is chasing the same 3 or 4 jobs and same firms, and you want to believe, you know, oh, I'm going to do my own thing. Yeah, but again, I think conversations like this are important, because you and I, just through this conversation, through 2 guys who've had these, you know, unique experiences and backgrounds and so on, if you know, young people are listening to this, it does sort of help, I think, to illuminate possibilities that you don't have to make these same mistakes if you don't want to, if you don't have to do it. There are other pathways for you, and in a way, we're sort of validating that choice through this conversation to do something other than the sort of cookie cutter pathways that a lot of people's peers might be pursuing. And yeah, especially when you're young, man, you're forgiven. You're forgiven for all of that. If you flunk out and fail or whatever it is, like, you know, chase an opportunity and it doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, I think people are surprisingly forgiving, especially in American culture. I mean, I've spent a lot of time living in other countries now. And I mean, even in Europe, which is like, you know, it's still whatever, with Western part of the world. And, you know, I've spoken to like German people who tell me like they're just shocked when, you know, some kid drops out of college and starts a startup. Like, that mindset just doesn't exist. Even in Western Europe, you know, it's like the mindset of like, just finish college first, because you never know. Just get through university. If you still have this, far-fetched, newfangled idea to start, just finish college first. But in America, we sort of glorify it of just like, yeah, take that risk. You know, I think it's still a conflict. People are a little bit scared, I think, to do it, but we do try to, you know, create incentives for young people to take risks, and I think that's a pretty healthy aspect of American culture.
Especially if you are in a decision making position, you know, and you're actually looking for people that are providing value as opposed to just looking for the Ivy League candidates.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is my whole getting up into Wall Street for me, I go, they're going to hire me because I went to Cornell. They're going to hire me because I look good in a suit. They're going to hire me because I've got the right haircut. And I truly was like, I'm good. Like I was banking on that. And now, I remember being on Wall Street and hearing stories about there were folks that would use this interview technique. They bring in an Australian guy, for instance, and he'd say, like he wouldn't know what Harvard was, right? Yeah. He wouldn't know what Yale is, sure. And it would break people. Yeah. It would break you because what it said was, without status, who are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And dude, when you pull status away from people, some scary shit can happen because there might not be anything underneath.
Yeah. This reminds me, there was a few years ago, this kid sent me an email, and I think I had written something. I think I'd just written this luxury beliefs post. This is 2019. I wrote this post. This kid sends me an email, and he, I don't know which movie this, one of the Spider-Man movies. So he's describing the scene to me of Tony Stark, the Iron Man character. I guess he and the Spider-Man kid, Peter Parker. Peter Parker's like, oh, I want the Spider-Man suit. I want the Spider-Man suit. And then he says something like, I'm nothing without the suit. And Tony Stark's response was, if nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. And I think there's, this kid's describing this to me. And he's like, yeah, we're so preoccupied with these credentials and this prestige and so on because we believe if we don't have it, then we're nobody. But through that desire, we're sort of revealing ourselves to be unworthy of it because we're so preoccupied with it. And it's actually, we should be valuing our identities and our abilities and our, whatever we have above and beyond those credentials that we're so frivolously pursuing. And I think there's something to that idea, right? It's actually not the credential that makes you. It's you may receive the credential as a byproduct of other talents and qualities that you have, but it's not an end in itself. And I mean, the truth is, at least, well, things are changing now, but at least until recently, it was actually pretty difficult to get into these schools in a sort of an objective, impartial, grades, test scores, all those things. It did sort of reveal at least a willingness to grind, right? If nothing else. And so, it's not the credential itself. It's sort of what it took to get there. And I think people often, they're confusing, right? They're conflating the signal for the underlying quality that it's supposed to capture.
And now that I've learned, number one, I was the soft, the turtle with nothing inside the shell, and I had to figure out who I was and go through that challenge. And I recommend everyone go out there and, face the fucking woods and figure it out yourself. But the way that I can give back and the way that I can participate in a world that's just a little bit better is I'm like the Australian guy on Wall Street saying, Harvard? Yeah, I've never fucking heard of that place. Because when you do that, number one, you're sending the right signal. You're giving people an early warning to say, not everyone knows about this fancy school you went to, jackass. Let's get back to the interview questions. Let's get back to what you do for fun, right? It's there's a Paul Graham quote that his one interview question is, what do you when he's hiring engineers, software engineers, what do you build for fun?
Yeah.
Meaning, are you an engineer when you're not an engineer? Like when you're not on the clock, are you just you're still building stuff, or when you're not on the clock, you're somebody else?
Yeah. There was a great book on this topic of sort of talent identification. Tyler Cowen and Daniel Gross wrote this book, Talent, and they have some very interesting approaches to identifying talent. They talk about how personality is what people do on the weekends. What are you doing outside of work hours to reveal this? And I've talked to founders and other people who are in those positions of interviewing candidates. What actually interesting, this is now some will ask applicants, what podcasts do you listen to? And I think that's an interesting one. Or what do you read? What books you read, what Substacks, what blog posts, what YouTube channels do you enjoy watching? I think there's a lot there that can capture someone's personality rather than just focusing on just credentials alone, right? That's Yeah, there are other ways I think to suss out personality and ability and interest and all those things too.
Yeah, that's great.
You know,
And of course, if they say, I listened to the Really Rich podcast by Nicholas Crown, you've heard that's just, you get the job, I think, straight away if they say that.
rich versus really rich.
Look, I mean, what we do on the weekends, I think, is a lot closer to who we really are and what we want to do and what we have to offer. So if there's any sort of challenge here, it's drop the obsession with status. I think if you drop the obsession with status and you just let your guard down a little bit and you veer towards value, nothing happens. No one gets hurt. The fucking power doesn't go out. You're just like, oh, okay. Like, this shit, it's so real and it's so not at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's useful to draw a distinction though, right? That inevitably the things that we do, I think, like, whether there's a difference, I guess, between doing things and status comes as a side effect, right? You're not consciously, explicitly chasing status. It's just you're doing the things that you enjoy doing, and status comes as a byproduct. Versus like explicitly chasing status. There are in either case, the outcome may be the same. Status is still conferred to you, but if you're chasing it directly, ultimately, I think that does lead more often than not to a life of feeling unfulfilled, unsatisfied, and maybe like short-term gratification, but medium and long-term feelings of hollowness. Versus you just do the things you enjoy doing, and naturally we're going to care people's reaction to it. We want people to like us. We want people to respect and admire us. But if you still continue to just focus on what's the thing that matters to people, that provides value to people, or fulfills you and fulfills others, that's just a better sort of explicit, conscious path to take, I think.
Don't get it backwards, kids. Even Rob agrees. Rob, where can people find you, man? This was an awesome discussion. I'm just so happy we got to talk, because I'm like learning in real time about this topic.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. So, well, you can follow me on Twitter at Rob K. Henderson, and then my Substack is robkhenderson.substack.com. And that's where you'll find my writing, my essays, thoughts on the psychology of social status, on luxury beliefs, on general sort of thoughts on research, on personality, on all of these things that you and I have been discussing. But yeah, this has been great. Really enjoyed this. Time flew by.
Listen, man, it did. And next time we're doing this in person, bro, because I don't do this virtual thing for anybody. I do it for you, okay? Because you
Right.
live so freaking far away.
Yeah.
But next time we're doing it in real life, man.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on, and see you soon, dude.
Yeah, likewise.